Till? He said 2 minutes after. What's that? They told me 2 minutes after. Well, I tell you what, we got enough information to present tonight. If we start early, maybe we can let you out early, all right? But I'm glad each one of you could come tonight. And my apologies, Jerry Pangle, 6:55. Well, we'll just go ahead and start, and I'll just take a little bit of time. This will be some explanation time that we'll use. But Jerry Pangle couldn't be here. Believe it or not, as a retiree, this fella likes to go out and catch foxes and coyotes and catch them live. I've told Jerry there's a slim line between bravery and stupidity. He may have crossed the line. He catches them. He catches foxes and coyotes live, and then he keeps them down in a kind of a root cellar setup, and then he keeps them for a couple of weeks, and then just before he comes back from Virginia to Tennessee, he gathers them up. He feeds them every day and gathers them up, and he takes them to a fellow that uses them for training hunting dogs. But he's enjoying himself. And Joe Hildreth would have led the meeting tonight, but except he's works at the hospital, and the computer system at the hospital has a major networking device that has just been brought in to install all of the insurance for the, this is going back to Hillary Care insurance. They had to put a new computer system in up at the hospital, and he's involved in that. So you're down to the water boy tonight. when the lead guy's gone, the second string's gone, you're down to the water boy tonight. So we'll make do, and we'll keep things going. And I'm glad to have each of you here tonight, but something extremely important is presented tonight: the influence of Islam in our country. Our country was founded on the values of a Christian Judeo-God. And religious freedom is fine, but multiculturalism is destructive. Islam is far more than a religion. Islam is a way of life. And you're going to see the influence that it's having on our entire society. And I'm glad to have Charles Potter got here tonight. And brother, would you come up here and open this evening's meeting with a word of prayer? Brother Potter's been out there at Tennessee Ridge Baptist Church for many years, and I'm glad to have him come by tonight. What a blessing it is. Thank you. Thank you.
Would you stand with us, please? Our Heavenly Father, as we bow before Thy throne of grace, how thankful and how grateful that we ought to be for the freedom that still exists in America. And dear God, we ask you to forgive us of our failures and our faults. And Lord, the blood that's on our hands for the little babies that we've murdered. Dear God, for the compromises that we've made in the lifestyles of Leviticus living. And dear God, we know that if there's no help from heaven, there will be no help on earth. So dear God, we pray especially that you'd speak to our hearts tonight, that we might realize the seriousness of this hour. Dear God, I pray that when we leave here that we'll be more determined, dear God, to have an agenda that we will stand and we will fight. And create within us a desire of Patrick Henry when he said, give us liberty or give me death. I think it's that serious. This may be the last battle, this may be the last opportunity that we'll have to turn America back to God. And I ask you, dear Lord, to bless the leaders, bless this meeting tonight, that first and foremost, that you and you alone might get the honor and the glory. But open up our hearts, instill in our souls the importance of this hour, and Lord, the nearness that we're coming to destruction. I have asked you, dear God, that you would take the leaders that's brought this meeting tonight and you would lead and guide them. Bless the speaker. Dear Heavenly Father, that you'd speak through him. the information that we so desperately need. We thank you again for loving us and blessing America. And Lord, maybe we ought to just ask you to spare America till Jesus comes. For we ask it in his blessed holy name. Amen.
I want you to stay standing, and if Mr. Wilford Clark would come and lead us in a pledge of allegiance. And I want to remind you that veterans amongst us, we want to first of all thank you for being that, giving your life, putting your life on the line that we could have freedom. But it's very proper when a veteran does the Pledge of Allegiance to salute, because you've earned the right to do that, and you're welcome to do that. But Will?
I can salute then, huh?
You sure can.
Let's all join us in the pledges. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, for which it stands, one nation, under God, in liberty and justice for all.
America can return to the greatness she had. If America was once great because America was good, if America will return to that goodness, she can return to the greatness. And we're also pleased to have a lady I've known some time, Miss Sharon Clark. She's going to come and sing a patriotic song at this time.
In New York Harbor stands a lady with a torch raised to the sky, and all who see her know she stands for liberty for you and me.
Sharon, patriotism and Christianity do go together. You can't have true patriotism without Christianity. And you can't have Christianity without patriotism. The two are, our nation was founded on a Christian Judeo God. And from the earliest parts of it, you don't study history in truth at all without seeing the depth of Christianity in our nation. And we're grateful to have tonight a speaker, J. Lee Douglas. He'll tell you a little bit more about him. Jerry Pangle, I'd heard him speak, maybe in Dixon County. Jerry heard him speak, and he says, we need to get that guy here. And to share some of the things about Islam that this is a specter that's hanging over our nation. And one of the best things we can do as citizens is to become aware of it. Because obviously our legislators are not aware of it. They're not aware of the danger of this threat because it's infiltrated so deeply. And for us to understand how deep this infiltration is important so that we can be better citizens, better voters. And that's the most important thing we do is to learn more about this. The enemy. If you don't study the enemy, you're probably going to be defeated. And now I want to preface this with this. Muslims are not the enemy. Islam is the enemy. There's a difference. There's a difference. The people that are enslaved by this culture many of them have come to America trying to escape the persecution that they have there. They want freedom. They don't know any different. The enemy is Islam, the teaching, this philosophy, and Sharia is the Arabic word for law. The Sharia is this set of guidelines that a proper Muslim must follow. And so I want to start from there. Our Muslims, the fellow down at the convenience store, the fellow that's there, that's not the enemy. The human beings that are enslaved by this teaching are not the enemy. The teaching itself is the enemy. And the best weapon we have is the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's the best. But Mr. Douglas is going to come tonight, and he's going to share with you some things to help you see how deep in our country this is. Now, Lee, can everybody see the screen fine the way it is? Or is it better if we turn the lights up front here off? Would that be better? Okay, why don't you come? Let's give him a hand.
I feel so very comfortable with you all. I grew up in a small town in Texas, and I feel like I'm there. A little bit about me, so you know, I'm just another guy. I grew up in Texas and grew up not as much of a Christianized sort of person. Although my mother was a woman of faith, my granny was the prayer in our family, and she prayed a lot. And when I was in high school, I started dating this girl in the Church of Christ and fell in love, and then ended up going to Abilene Christian University, which is the Church of Christ school, and it was really good for me. And I had such a fabulous exposure to the scriptures at that place in the Church of Christ. I don't go to the Church of Christ anymore. In part, I don't think they would have me, but I go to the Baptist church, and I've learned, and that's rather recent, the last 3 or 4 months, it's harder to get into the Baptist church than it is the kingdom of God. But they so far have let me in. And when I finished, I didn't finish college. I was able to get into dental school at the University of Texas, and I graduated a long time ago and went to Amarillo and practiced there. And then I moved from there and went to Switzerland, where I was actually a missionary and was there for less than a year in the French-speaking part of Switzerland. And then I returned to the States and eventually ended up coming to Tennessee. My wife was from here. So when I set up practice here, I was in Brentwood, and life was going sweet, and then hell turned loose, and I've gone through a divorce, and I've just known all of the ravages of the world that I think any man should ever want to know. But I did in 1997. I was invited to go. Well, let me back up. There are two ethnic groups in Nashville that are the largest ethnic groups anywhere in the world except where they're from. There are more Coptic Christians in Nashville in any place in the world except Cairo. There are more Kurds in Nashville than in Kurdistan, which the Kurds live in northern Iraq, Turkey, Iran, and Syria. And one day the governor from this region in northern Iraq in 1997 was visiting some of his relatives, and he had a toothache. So he was brought to me, and I was taking care of him. And while I had him under anesthesia, I told him that I and some others had an interest in going to Iraq and setting up a Christian medical dental clinic. Can he help us? And under anesthesia, he agreed to. So some friends and I went to Syria, and we were smuggled across the river into Iraq, and we did set up a clinic there. And under his protection, we were welcomed. And that clinic today is still operational. One of the people who had helped us there was a man named Yusuf. And Yusuf he manned radar installations in the first war with Iraq. He was our enemy. And if you remember Tariq Aziz, he was the spokesman for Saddam Hussein. Well, Yusuf ended up marrying his niece. So it gave him a certain level of status. And her brother went to London and was studying there. And while he was there, somebody took him aside and taught him about Jesus. He came back and was telling his sister and this man Yusuf, and they knew nothing about Jesus. And to hear him say it, it was like something crystallized in his soul. He knew that what he had heard was the truth. And so Yusuf knew that he couldn't stay there, but he wanted to preach the gospel, and he didn't even know what the gospel was. But he went up to northern Iraq, to Kurdistan, and he began to preach there. And there were attempts on his life because he wasn't falling into line with what he was supposed to be falling into line with, as you can imagine. The person who was in charge of the no-fly zone in the north happened to have a brother who went to church with me. I went to Belmont Church in Nashville. A lot of people know that because Amy Grant had her start there. And the brother over the no-fly zone contacted us, and we went and contacted Yusuf and tried to help him. And all kinds of good stuff came out of that. But when Yusuf was there, he had heard that Hamas had a contract out on his life. Not waiting to find out when they're going to kill him, he decided he'd find them first. When he learned where they were, he drove to their residence, knocked on the door, and introduced himself, and was brought in. And he said, "I just want you to know why I'm here." And he talked to them. And as he's talking to the commandant, who's sitting at a desk, he noticed behind him a big world map. On the United States, they had drawn a target. I thought that was interesting, that up there they would have an interest in us. And I've had an interest for a long time with what has been going on. And I sold my practice 10 years ago. I'm a wild man. I sold my practice 10 years ago, and I got into the gold and diamond business in Africa. And I made some money, and then I ended up losing it all. And for the last 9 years, I've been in the oil and gas exploration business. I grew up working in Texas on oil rigs, and I became friends with a man who was very successful, and he took me under his wing, and he taught me a lot about the business. And so at his death, I've been back in dentistry and am working in other people's offices. I don't have my own practice. So God's been real good to me to let me have something that I can fall back on to generate income. But if I were to title what I would like to say to you tonight, anything, it would be, so what? Now, I'm not an eloquent speaker. I don't speak actually very often. I'm much more comfortable writing things. I feel like I can write much better than I can talk. But what I want to talk to you about, let's start here with Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill is known for something that he said, and you've probably all heard it. He said, "He who fails to learn history is doomed to repeat it." And you've all heard that, I'm sure. And I would just ask you, if you could think of anything that's happened in American history that's going on now, because I'd like to draw some parallels for you, and I think that you'll find it very helpful. This year, I've come to know 3 people who are former Islamists: Noni Darwish, Samuel Bartholomew, and Walid Shubat. I know some of you know these people. And they denounced a totalitarian way of life, Islam, for something less dark, less violent, something that allows them to live in the reality with freedom to be wrong if they need to be wrong. But they're never required, living here in America as Christians, to conform necessarily to what other people want. And they didn't have that in Islam. So in the 1930s, there were men and women like these 3 people who I've named, and I'll tell you the names of people, and you'll know at least one of them: Elizabeth Bentley, Walter Kavitsky, and Whittaker Chambers. You probably recognize his name. Well, they awakened to the brutality of something that they had put their hands around, which was communism, another totalitarian system. In 1932, this guy, Whittaker Chambers, had become a Soviet spy. And with the help of other spies, he was transferring stolen microfilm copies of top-secret documents to his New York City agents. And he was doing that until 1939, when Hitler and Stalin formed a pact. And suddenly he realized he was part of the death brigade. He wasn't dealing life, he was dealing death. And he had an idealistic idea that by advancing communism and making everything equal, he was doing good. And suddenly he realized, not so. So he decided that he had to do something differently. And a few days later, after Hitler and Stalin had signed their pact, he was on a plane headed for D.C. He knew that somebody in D.C. needed to know that the government was infiltrated with totalitarians. In this case, they were communists. So what Chambers did was he reached out for the highest official he could find. He found a guy named Adolph Burl, who was FDR's, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's, Assistant Secretary of State. And at a private dinner at Adolph Burl's house, he told him about the espionage that was going on in the United States, and he told him the names, and he wrote them down, of 24 Soviet spies who were actually working in Roosevelt's administration. One of them he named was a guy, Alger Hiss. You've heard of him. And his brother, Donald Hiss. Well, urgently, Burl reported this to President Roosevelt. The president laughed and told him to go F himself. No action was ever taken. Except Hiss was promoted to be the trusted aide who later would go with Roosevelt to Yalta. Convinced that Chambers was telling the truth, Burl then found his Undersecretary of the Treasury, Dean Acheson. You've heard of him. And he told Acheson. And what did Acheson have to say? He said, "I've known these 2 boys since childhood and could vouch for them absolutely." So soon afterward, upon becoming the new Assistant Secretary of State, just below Cordell Hull, Acheson hired Donald Hiss to be his secretary. Thinking that he hadn't explained it well enough, Burl went back to Acheson to remind him that Hiss had been identified as a Soviet agent. Recognizing the seriousness and not wanting to ignore such a grave warning, Acheson conducted his own investigation of Donald Hiss, much like the investigation we've seen by the media on Barack Hussein Obama. Acheson went to Hiss and asked him if he is a communist. Hiss denied it, and Acheson summarily announced the matter's closed. Such behavior would be comparable to that of President Obama if he had been told that he had members of the Muslim Brotherhood in his administration, and he ignored it. Years later, Burrell soft-pedaled the Hiss boys by saying, the idea that the Hiss boys were going to take over the United States government did not strike me of any immediate danger. Similarly, we today argue that there's no immediate danger to having a few Al-Qaeda members or Muslim Brotherhood members in the White House or in the Tennessee governor's administration. But employing them just may not be a great idea. So in an interview years later, Burrell also offered that, oddly, we were all trying not to tell anything that ought not to be told, and there were pretty consistent leaks whenever anything went through Alger Hiss' office. We never understood that. Okay, now speed up to nine years later, to 1948. The war's over, and Whittaker Chamberlain, he gave up, and he just went on and got a job working at Time magazine. But then, if you remember Richard Nixon, you remember him? Where did he get his fame? It was in the HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee. And he chaired that, and he brought Whittaker Chambers before his committee and asked him questions, and once again, Whittaker Chambers named Alger Hiss as a Soviet spy. Learning of this, and wanting to clear his name, Alger Hiss demanded an appearance before the committee. And Alger Hiss was a highly educated, of the top shelf kind of society that you could imagine. He was a Harvard-trained man. And I want to show you a little movie of this hearing when Alger Hiss is there, just so that you can get a flavor of it. Before we start it, notice how he sits there comfortably and how he talks clearly and loudly. He's not lacking confidence by any means at all. Here, go ahead and start this, Samuel. Thank you. I know you can't hear that. We're having an equipment malfunction. Oh. Well, this is Alger Hiss. This is the actual footage that's taking place during the hearing. Alger Hiss is very competent, very well spoken, expensive suits. Shall we give up on it, Sam? Okay, one last time. This is 90 seconds. There's Whittaker Chambers there. Well, he's asking if he knows him. That's good. Well, you can just let it play out, and we won't have to worry about the sound. Here's what this doesn't show you, is that after Chambers was sworn in, Alger Hiss asked, and I'll quote verbatim, "May I interrupt at this point, because I take it this will take more than 10 or 15 minutes. Would it be possible for one of the members of the committee to call the Harvard Club and leave word that I won't be there for a 6 o'clock appointment?" You see, Hiss was a Harvard man, and he wasn't going to let anyone forget it. Then, as today, the press leapt to his defense. Universally, his performance was acclaimed a smashing success. Chambers was portrayed as a vulgar impossible. Hiss was known for his pedigree, and Chambers for his rumpled suit. Chambers had bad teeth, which was a point endlessly cited in press accounts of the hearings. In the New York Times 1994 obituary, the New York Times admitted that without Richard Nixon's doggedness, nothing would have ever have come of this. But it turned out that it was a he says, she says, and Nixon was urging Chambers to show some evidence because he'd shown no physical evidence. So he agreed that he would, and he hopped on a train, and he took the train to the Bronx, where his former house was now occupied by his nephew. And he went to the dumbwaiter and he pulled an envelope off that he had hidden in the dumbwaiter, took it back with him, and it had all kinds of handwritten notes and documents that had obviously come from Alger Hiss. The FBI looked at the typewriter and the typewriting on the documents, and I've gotten ahead of myself. Go back one. If you can just go. This is my fault. It's not Sam's fault. They weren't convinced that Whittaker Chambers was telling the truth, and they asked for something evidence. And Whittaker Chambers combed his mind, and finally he said, I know what it is. One time I was with him, and he was so excited because he'd seen a promontory warbler. And it's a very rare bird that's bashful and no one ever sees. And Whittaker Chambers told HUAC that he had been told by Alger Hiss that Alger Hiss had seen one at a very precise location. So in a closed hearing without Whittaker Chambers there, one of the members of Nixon's committee was an ornithologist also, and they started chatting, and Alger Hiss volunteered that he had actually seen one of those birds. Sam, one of those birds. And so from that point forward, the committee never doubted anything that Whittaker Chambers had to say. So I'll pick up on the story, he'd gone to New York and came back, and he had shown them documents, and yet it just wasn't enough to push it over the top. It was almost like O.J. Simpson. The evidence is there, but somehow you just can't get a conviction out of it. Now, I don't know how you feel about O.J. Simpson. I personally think he was guilty. I may be the only one here who has that opinion. So here things are coming apart, and there were people, they stick together, and as disinterested as the Democrats ordinarily are in facts, future presidential candidate Adlai Stevenson, you've heard of him, and Harvard law instructor, soon to be Supreme Court Justice and founder of that great civil rights organization, the ACLU, Felix Frankfurter, offered to settle the issue by agreeing to testify as a character witness for Hiss. This guy. And not only did Alger Hiss, the spy, get the future Supreme Court Justice willing to testify to his character, so did Eleanor Roosevelt. Does that startle you? Well, Chambers was frightened. He was a nobody. He had no formal education. He had been kicked out of Columbia. And Nixon was telling him, we can't do this in secret like you want. We need to take this to the American people. And surprisingly, a survey was taken. 4 out of 5 Americans didn't believe her, even though she and her husband had control. They believed Whittaker Chambers. 4 out of 5 Americans. They knew what was going on, just like you know what's going on. So, in these hearings, this confident, boisterous Alger Hiss is continuing to prod Whittaker Chambers. Say these things to me outside, he said. Say them to me outside. Because if you testify in Congress, you're protected. You have immunity. No one can sue you if you're giving any kind of testimony. Same thing holds true for our congressman. So he knew that he was safe, and he wouldn't have to worry about being sued. So he's being goaded by Alger Hiss to say something outside. And he was soon to get his way, because on Face the Nation radio, I didn't know there was a Face the Nation radio, did you? But there was, and that's where he actually said that, he said on the radio, Alger Hiss was a communist, and he may be now. And then he added, I do not think Mr. Hiss will sue me for slander or libel. And to the surprise of everyone, he didn't. And he was offered free legal services. He was offered investigative services. He was offered money of an unknown origin. Finally, he was so shamed that he did it, but he didn't want to. And why would he not want to? Because of his guilt. But the shame forced him to do it, so he filed suit. And now we had the hearings that were suspended, and we've got a trial that's going on. And Nixon went to him and he said, we need more evidence. Because FDR has turned the Department of Justice onto you. And the FBI is planning to charge you because you brought those papers out. They're saying that you perjured yourself and they're about to indict you. So you would think that everybody, including FDR, would be saying, well, he's obviously the only person who's telling the truth. But it was an upside-down world, kind of like 2012, if you know what I mean. Upside down. So Nixon said to him, do you have any more proof? And it was like he had been waiting for somebody to ask him. And this is one of the most nuclear incidents that happened in the history of America. Chambers said, yes, I do. So Chambers and two officials with Nixon's team, they got in a car and they drove to Chambers' farm the Thursday after Thanksgiving, 1948. And when they went to his farm in Maryland, they went out to his pumpkin patch. And he reached for one particular pumpkin, lifted it up, he took the top off of it, because it had been cut, and he reached inside and he pulled out a package that contained high-grade microfilm, the pumpkin papers, the famed pumpkin papers. How many of you have ever heard of them? One person, two, three, handful. The pumpkin papers. So he pulled them out, and these were papers, these were documents that were high-quality microfilm of highly confidential documents from the U.S. Navy and the U.S. State Department. Without doubt, at least 3 documents had come from his office, his office. So as perjury author Alan Weinstein described it in his book, Perjury, he said, this provided definite proof of one of the most extensive espionage rings in the history of the United States. Now, this triggered in investigations, they actually had to do their job. It's like the Department of Justice with Holder. He's finally had to do something about some of the incidents that have gone on because everybody's saying something to him. Or it's like the leaks that have been coming out of the White House. When Dianne Feinstein, one of your loyal Democrats, begins to complain, you have to stop the behavior. So they began to have grand juries, and of course Alger Hiss is pulled in, and in one of the grand jury hearings, they were talking to him about all of the events that I've described to you, and he stands before the grand jury and he says, you know, and this is a quote, I am amazed, and until the day that I die, I shall wonder how Whittaker Chambers got into my house to use my typewriter. That's what the grand jurors did. They laughed too. But the New York Times, they wondered out loud, how did he do that? So, telling you this, I want you to keep in mind that it was the Hitler-Stalin Pact that drove Chambers out of communism in 1939. And it was 10 years later when the evidence against Alger Hiss was uncovered and presented. Federal law has a 7-year statute of limitations on treason. Therefore, no amount of evidence could bring a charge against Mr. Hiss. The statute had run. But, and again, Holder was pushed into doing it, they did charge him with perjury because he had clearly lied. Even though they couldn't charge him with the crime and convict him, they could charge him with the crime and convict him and seek punishment for him for perjury. So he was sentenced to 5 years in prison in Pennsylvania, and of those 5, he served 3.5. And when he got out, he first spoke of his persecution to the students and faculty of Princeton University, where, upon conclusion, he received a hero's welcome, a standing ovation. America's finest. Okay, so, predictably, we all know that Bill Clinton did not have sex with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. Neither did Hiss commit treason. And as Clinton shall maintain all of his life innocence, so did Alger Hiss until his death, which occurred 1 year after the U.S. government's release of the Venona files. Who's heard of the Venona Project? Let me tell you about the Venona Project, those of you who don't know. The Venona Project started in the 1940s, and there was a guy named Carter Clark, Colonel Carter Clark, and he and his group broke the Soviet code and began to decipher the Soviet cables. Truman, upon learning of it, told him to stop, but he disobeyed. To our fortune, to our blessing, because by continuing to decipher and intercept those codes, we learn more about what the Soviets were doing in our own country. This is going to shock you. Did you know that Stalin learned of the bomb, the atomic bomb, before Truman? Isn't that shocking? In July of 1995, our government, for the first time, released some of the decrypted communications going back to the 40s between the Russian government and other individuals, including Alger Hiss. In essence, we have the party on the other end of the phone affirming that Whittaker Chambers, after his conversion, had always been telling the truth. Alger Hiss and his brother Donald were Soviet spies. We know from the Venona Project also that Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, tried for treason and convicted and executed in 1953, had indeed transferred secrets to the Soviets about the design details for the implosion device needed to trigger the bomb. They were guilty as hell. Now, why am I taking the time to tell you this story? What does it have to do with the people in Humphreys County or America? One can argue that in spite of the placement of countless communists in America, in America's government, we survived, didn't we? But can we say that we haven't been taken over by the communists? How long has it been since we actually had a capitalist system operating here in America? It's been 100 years since Woodrow Wilson. We've survived it, didn't we? But at what cost? What cost to you? What cost to your bank account or your children? It is freedom. It's freedom, and it's the other stuff too. Money also. What cost to the world? No one doubts that when Roosevelt went to Yalta, he was very ill. And he went to meet Stalin and Churchill. Churchill later stated that a stronger American president could have saved Czechoslovakia and Hungary from Russian domination. It mattered to them. I think it mattered a lot. Because you see, Alger Hiss was the counselor. He was the guide for Roosevelt when he was over in Yalta. World War II began with Britain and France over Poland, and through Hiss's counsel, it ended up being a Soviet possession. After the war was all over and millions of people had died, Poland was not a free country, and that was what triggered the war. And it was back being controlled by someone else. That burns me up. So Alger Hiss played an instrumental role in all of Roosevelt's decisions. At a time when everybody in the world knew that America was the lone superpower. We could have done anything we wanted, but instead, Roosevelt and Alger Hiss. What would the Eastern Bloc nations be like today if they had not had a Soviet master who intentionally starved millions to death in Ukraine and who imprisoned other millions of Russians, Czechs, and Poles? We can't say that there have been no consequences. We dare not. Guided by Hiss, Roosevelt agreed to Stalin's demand that all civilian and military Russians be returned to the motherland, to their deaths, to conceal the truth of what Uncle Joe had actually been doing back at home. Soviet penetration into our U.S. government was so deep, Stalin learned of the bomb before Truman. On the day of his conviction, Yale alumni Dean Acheson, of his conviction, at a press conference stated that he did not intend to turn his back on Alger Hiss. No, sir. FDR's Secretary of Treasury, Harry Dexter White, remember that, upon being accused of spying, was transferred by Truman to head the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, the agency that's so generous with American money. Harry Dexter White, the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, before he left to head the IMF, at the same time that Chiang Kai-shek was in China battling against Chairman Mao for China, the Treasury had been instructed to send $20 million in gold bullion to Chiang Kai-shek. White refused to do it but didn't tell anybody. He just stopped the paperwork and it didn't go anywhere. At that same time, though, being busy as he was, at that same time, White had turned all of his attention to attempting to arrange a $100 million 30-year loan at an extremely low interest rate to Russia, the Soviet Union. Last century, the communism killed over 100 million people through Stalin, Pol Pot, Mao, Khmer Rouge, and others. What portion of these deaths could have been stopped if communists had not infiltrated our government? As Burrell had stated, it's not like the boys are going to take over the government immediately. We shall see, not tomorrow, maybe not next year, or possibly in 10 years, the Muslim Brotherhood flag flying over our schools. But the large numbers of MBs, Muslim Brotherhood, I'll call them MBs, okay? MBs, that was a terrible Freudian slip. MBs in our Department of Justice, State Department, the state levels like Tennessee, even now, did you know the ACLU is now controlled by the Muslim Brotherhood? It's on the Drudge Report today or yesterday. So ask yourself, is the Obama administration, is their treatment of Israel and Netanyahu a result of MB influence? Did the decision to not permit oil and gas drilling in the Gulf, but to give $200 million to Venezuela for oil and gas exploration, was that a result of MB influence? The decision to not provide security for Benghazi, MB? Was the decision to facilitate the Arab Spring everywhere but Iran, where the citizenry are Western friendly, was that an MB decision? What role did the MB play in seeing to Turkey facilitating the movement of American-provided weapons to the Libyans now being transferred to the Syrians? That came out Friday. I guess you all probably saw that too. MB? What do you think? MB. And surprisingly, there are actually groups in Nashville, Christian leaders, Jewish leaders, who eagerly are welcoming the imams to parley with them and to be buds with them in the name of unity. At what peril? What did a Jew have that he could talk to Hitler about? And it's not only the government. This happened on George Bush's watch. Suhail Khan and Grover Norquist. Most of you will recognize Grover Norquist's name. Muslim Brotherhood. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Why am I here if you know everything I'm saying? So, did you see that's white. That right there. Did you see that? What do you think? Have the editors of Newsweek changed their tune? Do they really believe that Romney is better for America than him? Could you force yourself to believe that? And have you been hearing of all of the newspapers now that are endorsing Romney, I think they've gotten, yes, the Tennessean has. I think they've gotten as much from him as they can get, and they know it. And now they realize the people, you are on to them. And they're going to do all they can to look like they're your best buds, and they feel the same way. They are not, Newsweek and those guys are not our friends. And they may be saying what sounds good to our ears, but it's not for the reason that we want it to be. And I think we need to stay alert to them. So, with all of the things, all of the influences for destructive decisions that were made under the influence of another totalitarian system, communism, it had destruction for our country. It had destruction for people in other countries around the world. So today, the Muslim Brotherhood and Islam are forces that are intending to move in, and they've worked their ways into some of the highest stations in our country and are exerting an influence upon the decisions that are made. You know, if we didn't care whether America stayed as what I consider to be a Christian country, but just a working country like, say, Finland or Denmark, well, we just, throw up your hands and say, well, if they want to have a caliphate, why not? But it's destructive. It never leads to good, just like communism never leads to good. And so the reason that I think that we need to resist it is the same reason that there needed to be resistance against communism in our own government. And unfortunately, in those years, there was such a trust for the government. It's like if you get in trouble, I remember as a child, I always thought, if something really bad happens to my family, well, we can always turn to the government. Like, they care about me. So, what we do in regards to the Muslim Brotherhood is going to have an effect, a direct effect upon our lives and upon our children's lives. So, I didn't talk to you about what they're doing. In my conversation with John, I was very impressed with how much he knows about the Muslim Brotherhood, and he calls himself the water boy. So if he's water boy, then you've got some great leaders here. I suspect that you do. And it's hard for us to have this many people come to one of our 912 meetings. We started it 3 years ago in Nashville with just a little internet advertisement saying, if you want to take back our country and restore the values that America was founded on, I said, meet me at this bar and grill in Brentwood at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday, a weekday. Nobody can get off work to do that. 135 people came. A bunch of white, angry men. No, we actually had a Muslim join us. One of our first members was a Muslim. He voted for Obama, and he was a day trader, and he had lost his pants. And he had flipped. I mean, suddenly this guy is the best conservative you could ever dream of. He could talk about it, and that's the way it is. My sister's a liberal, and she suddenly moved to a position of she's a supervisor for Kaiser Permanente in California, and suddenly she's got to make decisions for her workers, and they're throwing up to her, union, you can't tell us to do that. And my sister is becoming a conservative because she's no longer the union member. And the longer everybody lives, the fewer liberals they're going to be, because it just doesn't work. It never works. So that's what I had to share with you, and I hope it's beneficial and great for you. Being here for me it's a blessing. I'm so thankful to be here. Thank you for letting me come.
We've got, let's see, what time is it? What time is it? What is it? 10 till 8? Okay. We could take just a couple minutes if somebody might have, we can't take a lot of questions, but just if somebody might have a question, they wanted to come up here and use the mic. Why don't you come on up here? Why don't you take your mic and make them quick. We got a 30-minute presentation to do after this, but...
Yes, I'd like for you to answer some questions about Tennessee and Umphrey's County involved with this movement in our government, the state of Tennessee.
You're talking about AMAC?
Yes.
Here locally.
Right.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
AMAC,
he is from here, isn't he?
If you can share a little bit
Well,
about AMAC.
One of the first things that we, 912, did is we took over the Republican Party in Williamson County. We got all of our members in Williamson County to go and be there, and we elected a guy who is serving us like a trooper. His name is Kevin Kukaji. Kevin Kukaji, don't forget that name. And he's a powerhouse. And he and I had heard a rumor last November that the governor was forming a Muslim advisory council. What is that? I mean, if he's doing that, he's got to have a Hindu advisory council, a Christian advisory council. Where does it stop? And we contacted the governor's office, and they denied it. Okay, well, the governor wouldn't deny unless it were true. But then we heard it come back again. So we contacted the chairman of the state Republican Party, whose name is Chris Devaney. And he said he would check. And he came back and said, no, nothing to it. But in April, we discovered an email that actually was a congratulatory email, or was a letter, to one of the imams who had formed this committee, actually congratulating him for partnering with the Tennessee state government to be advisors. And when we began to question them, they would say things like, well, we hired a woman. Oh, she is a Muslim, isn't she? Well, she was in 4-H, though, in Waverly, and her father's a doctor there. She was in 4-H. Did I mention that? And they never offered that she was a specialist in Sharia-compliant finance. Now, I don't know how that's going to help her sell one of the leading products for Tennessee, which is bacon and Jack Daniel's whiskey. But I'm sure the governor has some use for her. So we took out that ad. Did you guys see that ad? Full-page ad. We did that. And the governor didn't like it at all. But, you know, I don't care. I don't think he's a bad man. I think he's just ignorant. And there's a difference between being stupid and being ignorant. He's not stupid, but I think he's ignorant. And I think he's a warm, fuzzy kind of guy that just wants everybody to be nice and go along. And he's unwilling to change on that. And some people have suggested it's because he's in the oil business. I don't know if that's true or not. As Barack Obama said, you eventually get enough money, you don't need any more. Now, I didn't say that. But I can't imagine that a guy who has the worth of what the governor has is going to be interested to do something that isn't going to be good for the state. I just think he's ignorant. But ignorance can be a killing if you let it be. And that's why we've decided we're not going to ignore it. I don't know what else we can do, frankly, right now. I think if we were 2 years down the road and elections were held today, I think he would win again. I don't think that we have a very strong chance of getting him out of office unless there's an enormous uprising. But we've done all that we can do in Nashville. I don't think there's anything else that we can do. Now, we have a great deal of influence with the legislators, and most of them are with us on this. So what he has done is something that he can do by his lonesome, just as being the governor of the state. Did I answer your question, sir? I don't know where you went.
A good friend of mine, Kurt Blackwood, he works with the Henry County Tea Party, and just a good man. This is a good man here, and he indicated he's got something to say.
Thank you for your kind words. Lee, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
I've heard a rumor that there is a new billboard that's gone up on the 1000 block of Charlotte Avenue, from which that location you can see the Capitol. And I'm told that it says on that billboard, Governor Haslam, why have you partnered Tennessee government with an Muslim organization? And it gives a website underneath, www.keeptennesseefree.org. And I'm wondering if you've heard any flack, as it were, about what that may be causing in Nashville. Can you address that?
there's not much that I can say about it. I haven't heard any reports on how the governor has received that. I know he's very sensitive to that.
Yes.
Very sensitive. And I was actually at a Republican function, and Chris Devaney, I know who he is because I've seen him on TV. Many of you probably know who he is. He wouldn't know me from John, I'm sure. But he came up to me at this Republican function and said, I want to introduce myself to you. And I knew he was from Texas because I'd followed up on him. I checked him out. And I said, you're from Texas? Me too. He said, yeah, I know you are. You're in the oil and gas business, aren't you? So I knew that they'd been looking. They want to know something about us. And they're sensitive to this. But I don't know that it's so sensitive that they're going to take it down. I think pride now, saving face, is the driving force for what they're doing. It's a terrible mistake.
I think what we can do, all right, first of all, we have to be aware of how deep the infiltration is and see it, and just being exposed to these things will be extremely helpful. But how does Islam gain all the leverage to get all of these laws, Tennessee schools becoming Sharia compliant, and this is going on as we speak? How do they do this? The same way the homosexuals were a small percentage of the populace get all the advantages they get by being noisy constituents, by making the phone calls, by writing the letters, by electing legislatures that feel our point of view is correct. And that's what we can do. We can go through and vet our representatives, whether they be state representatives or whether they be federal representatives, vet them as far as what their stand is on these issues. And then call them when they're making mistakes. The people rising up can make a change.
Absolutely.
And we have to be educated. We have to realize things are going on and then make a change. Jim?
If I may add, the governor, I know, has been consulting with some of the legislators, not about this, but about the healthcare exchanges. So it is not worthless when you've got an issue to contact your state representative or your state senator, and you'll have more influence contacting your own than somebody else's, even though it's not bad to contact the others. But the ones who you've elected, they will listen to you, and you can put pressure on the governor through them. I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
My name is Jim Bourne. I'm from the Benton County Tea Party. I'm involved with the Tennessee 7th and 8th Coalition. Both of these organizations, now they understand the coalition is a combination of a whole bunch of Tea Parties, and both of them are working hard on this. The 8th is the one who put up that billboard. The 8th has established a PAC, and they're going to use that PAC to go after Haslam, partially at least. The 7th just had a meeting in Columbia, and this was the primary focus of that meeting. They're not going to go away. It's getting bigger.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay, let's give him a hand here, all right? Now, are you going to need to leave before we're finished tonight? Are you going to need to leave? Or?
Are you going to show that?
Right.
Yeah, I'll stay for that.
Okay, well then, he's going to stay for the video, so after the video, if you have some questions, talk with him a little bit. You're welcome to, and please do. A couple of announcements I need to make here. It takes cash to keep things going, all right? We've got to pay the rent here, and we're paying for the videos that are being made, and they're... Joe Hildreth, who's not here tonight, he's gone to the trouble, he puts these up on the internet to where these can be shown. What we're speaking right now, it'll take him a week or two to get in there.
We have commission meetings now.
Okay, the commissioner meetings, the county commission meetings. We're doing what we can to get the information in our county out to the people, to be informed about what's going on, and that's so important. But it all takes money. I mean, we pay this gentleman $40. We pay the people $90 for the rent, something like $120 for rent. On the way out, if you drop a little bit of money in the jar, that'll be helpful.
Did everybody see the shopper's guide, the front page ad we had? Did everybody like it? Fill up that donation bottle over there. It cost us $350. And we've got another one coming out. We're going to have the front page of the shopper, the last shopper before the election. So we really need your help. Thanks.
Now, the one coming out before the election, that's Republican, Humphreys County Republican Party. Right. Well, it is and it isn't. It is and it isn't. I mean, literally. But it's, if you're willing to help on the way out, that would be very good. Also, we have the new 2013 Freedom Calendars, and I forgot to bring one up here. Those of you might remember, they're holding one up right there. It's got a picture of the Declaration of Independence on the front of it, and as you go through each month, they cover different issues of the first 10 amendments make the Bill of Rights. And the first 10 months, they're explaining the amendments to you so you know what your rights are. You have the right. There's a situation, jury nullification is one that just happened up in Minnesota. This is where these calendars came from. The people know about it. There was a farmer that went to jail for selling fresh milk to some of his neighbors. And so when it went to court, he was guilty because that was the rule, but the jury nullified it. See, the power of the jury is a powerful power that our founders gave us, but we got to know about these. I mean, if you don't know how to use a gun, you're stuck. You try to club the bear with the butt, all right? And it doesn't work. But if you know how to use it, and this calendar will teach you some things about our Constitution. They're $5 each. You're welcome to take one. Take as many as you want. There's plenty of them there. Give them away for Christmas presents. The Tuesday night of election, where if you want to go and gather with some of us, we'll be down at Tony's Pizza. Start going down about 6 o'clock. They will serve food until 9 o'clock, but he'll stay open. The Tony's Pizza there in New Johnsonville. It's right by the Dollar General store there in the shopping center. If you want to come by and he's got a big screen TV. We can sit and watch the results. Hopefully come in the way we want them to, but we'll make choices on that. You're welcome to come by on the Tuesday night. Pardon? Yeah, come in around 6 but they'll be serving food till 9 o'clock, so you can come in as you need and enjoy that. There's T-shirts that are available. If Jerry's he's up in Virginia now, he'll be bringing some T-shirts back. If you want things like long sleeve T-shirts with We the People on them, or a sizes larger than extra large, if you will sign up, he will, let him know that you want them. He'll go ahead and order them as you want, but just sign up for those, and they'll be, the ladies have a list for that. Some of you might remember the agenda film that we showed here. If you remember a kind of a British accent guy, he's actually from New Zealand. His name is Trevor Loudon. He is a nationally known speaker. He's very, very good on helping people to realize how the problems that are going on around, the Islamic infiltration, the tie from Barack Obama to Frank Marshall Davis. If he's not a biological father, he's definitely a philosophical father. All right, and Trevor Loudon will be speaking in Columbia the night of November 5th. That's the Monday night before the election, November 5th. And it's from 7 o'clock till 9 o'clock. If you would like to if there's enough people that want to go on a bus, if you'll sign a list that Pat has over there, sign up, and if there's enough people that want to go, we'll take a bus. If there's enough people, we'll take 2 buses. But we'll do that. If you're interested in the Trevor Loudon presentation, you sign up for that one. And I think I covered all my announcements. All right. I'm glad you all came tonight. Now, what we're going to show here is you go ahead and get it started. Well, it's going. I can explain it a little bit. Glenn Beck made the project video. See, if you have to push the projector, push it over to. Oh, you tied in. All right, pause it there. Pause it just for a minute. All right, he made this project video. It was a 2-part. It was a 2-part video, and part 1 had a lot of information that was very good. A big premise in here. There was a Holy Land Foundation trial where Islamic organizations were put on trial because they're funneling money to Hamas. And there was there was many boxes, tens of thousands of pages of evidence that was given to the terrorists during the pre-trial, the discovery part of the trial. And this evidence will not be released by our government. They won't show it to us. It has all kinds of information tying these organizations. CARE. Anytime you see an organization called CARE, C-A-I-R, anytime there's lawsuits going on, it's CARE that's doing it, the Council for American Islamic Relations. All right, these people go right in to the Obama White House, they go right into the George W. Bush White House, they go right into the Bill Clinton White House. And these are people that want to bring America down. Why don't they understand? Well, there's a blindness is there, but as they say toward the end of this, one of the biggest things that we can do is, number one, be educated. Learn about this stuff. And as I've said all along, Muslims are not the enemy. It's not going to do any good to go down and find a Muslim and try to hurt him or be mean to him. That's not, Islam is the enemy. It's a war of philosophies. And to help these people through it, the gospel of Jesus Christ is the answer. That literally is the answer. And how important is it? But we've got to understand how deeply it's in there. It's when our governor doesn't know, he doesn't understand, he doesn't realize it's there. He's bringing it in, and this is a culture. Look at the end result. When you want to see what communism does to a country, don't go to some fellows that are sitting around in a dark room just talking. Go and look how the people on the streets of China live. And not the front streets, the back streets. Go look and see how the people, look at the people that were slaughtered in Thailand, in Laos, in Vietnam, when we left it. The Pol Pot. I mean, look at the effect of it. When you want to see what Islam and Sharia does, go to Saudi Arabia. Some of you people have been soldiers over there in the Mideast, and you understand what Sharia does to a culture of people. Where a woman who misbehaves can be taken out and killed by her husband or her father. It's called an honor killing. She's defamed the honor of, where a thief has his hands cut off. Go and look in these areas where people's freedom is taken. And that's where you see what Islam does. And then when we see it cropping up here in America, where schools in Tennessee are becoming Sharia compliant, where Hollywood is now checking with imams to make sure that's Muslim preachers, to make sure that the films they make are Sharia compliant, to make sure that they won't offend any Muslims. No. If you object to something, the way you object to it is not use the product, and it's not to go and destroy things. See, Islam at its source creates people of hatred. Because there's a hatred toward Christians and there's a hatred toward Jews. The Quran calls the Jews descended from monkeys and pigs. And this is what their holy book teaches them. And I'm sorry, that's wrong. When the prophet Muhammad, his favorite wife was named Aisha. He married her when she was 6 years old. He consummated the wedding when she was 9. Someone that has relationships with a 9-year-old child would go to jail. But 1 out of 6 people that walk the face of the earth bow to his God 5 times a day. There's something wrong with this. The people are enslaved in this, and you'll see. Okay, we'll go ahead and play this, and I'm glad you could come.
of settlement is a civilization jihadist process. The Muslim Brotherhood must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands so that it is eliminated and Allah's religion is made victorious over all other religions. Without this level of understanding, we are not up to this challenge and have not prepared ourselves for jihad yet. The success of the movement in America in establishing an observant Islamic base with power and effectiveness will be the best support and aid to the global movement project.
Two months after 9/11, at the request of the White House, Swiss authorities raided the home and offices of a longtime Muslim Brotherhood envoy and international terrorism financier, Yosef Nada. One of the files that law enforcement officials seized, dated December 1st, 1982, was written in Arabic. It would become known as the Project, a detailed plan for Muslims to infiltrate and defeat the West. An incursion that would compromise leaders and law enforcement, control speech, and change the fabric of America. It would be slow, methodical, and permanent.
Columbus is a standard Midwestern town, college town. We have the Ohio State University and a number of other schools. We have insurance.
It's a fraud.
He is a truck driver from Ohio, born in Kashmir, and a U.S. citizen since 1999. But federal authorities say Ayman Ferris is something more, an Al-Qaeda operative.
Ferris was convicted of providing material support to Al-Qaeda for his role in a plot to destroy the Brooklyn Bridge.
TV has learned Christopher Paul, a Worthington man accused of plotting to help Al-Qaeda, will plead guilty to working with terrorists.
Christopher Paul grew up in the northwest suburbs of Columbus. He was a star athlete at Worthington High School, where he graduated in 1983. He attended Ohio State, where it's believed he converted to Islam. At some point during his life, Paul committed to violent jihad. He received his training at an Al-Qaeda training facility in Afghanistan. In June 2008, Paul pleaded to conspiracy to use weapons of mass destruction in a plot to attack a French island resort. Abdulhakim Mujahid Muhammad also attended the Masjid Omar Mosque. In June 2009, he opened fire on soldiers in front of a United States military recruiting office in Little Rock, Arkansas, in a jihad attack. In a January 2010 letter to Judge Herbert Wright Jr., he wrote, "I'm affiliated with Al-Qaeda. This was a jihadi attack on infidel forces that didn't go as planned." The Department of Justice refused to try the case in federal court as a domestic terror attack. Mohammed was tried for murder by the state of Arkansas, and there was no investigation into his radicalization or training. 4 individuals with ties to the mosque on Riverview Drive linked to terrorism. Patrick Poole began investigating.
And so I'm driving down the road here, and of course this is an area I'm pretty familiar with since I went to high school right there. And I drive by here, Sunrise Academy, the full-time Islamic school. And I'm like, that's unusual. That used to be the public library building. And that's when I went home and looked them up on the internet and saw that Salah Sultan was their religious director.
Patrick Poole lives in central Ohio. He discovered that the road to domestic terror went through his neighborhood.
And of course, when I started looking into Salah Sultan, one of the things I did was his address was on his resume. And so I looked it up, and lo and behold, right here is where he lived. Not more than a mile from my house.
Dr. Salah Sultan was the religious director at the Masjid Omar Mosque. He later moved to the Noor Islamic Cultural Center in Hilliard, Ohio. Poole wrote an article about Sultan referencing previously published materials demonstrating his connections to terrorist organizations. The interfaith community rallied around Sultan, as did the local newspaper.
So the Dispatch had their religion reporter come out and interview me, and the article rolls out about a month after my report, and here I'm a racist bigot, Islamophobe, trying to impose Christian theocracy, all for daring to question this guy, what had already been reported about this gentleman here in Hilliard.
The Muslim Brotherhood has invented a term, and they've been very effective with this, called Islamophobia. And essentially, anybody who tries to address Islamist ideology, no matter how hostile it is objectively to the West, is deemed to be speaking hatefully about Islam, and therefore to be a bigot and an Islamophobe. And in American culture, that's the worst thing you can be, right, is a bigot. Doesn't matter whether you really are one or not. What matters is whether you'll be accused of being one. And that really is the template that the media follows.
While Sultan was being labeled as a respected religious leader, there was plenty of evidence to suggest he was anything but a moderate. Posted on Sultan's personal website was his resume.
His vision, which I guess is his hope for the future, is to live happily and die as a martyr. For those of us, I don't think you have to be somebody who's actually either prosecuted or investigated terrorism cases to know that martyrdom is the way that in Islamist thought they refer to people who die in the jihad, that is, who die in violent activity, whether it's against the United States or Israel or another target that's achieved as an enemy or viewed as an enemy. So I think that's this looks like a resume that's certainly suggestive of somebody who is steeped in Islamist ideology, and as somebody who's studied Islamist ideology and knows that it's hostile to the West, I'd find this alarming.
2 weeks after the Columbus Dispatch writes their defense of Dr. Salah Sultan, he shows up on Middle Eastern TV where he's claiming that the United States government was behind 9/11.
لكن الموضوع كله موضوع كبير تم التخطيط له من داخل الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية حتى يمكن السيطرة على العالم وإرهاب العالم كله.
And then he goes on to defend an Al-Qaeda cleric, a close friend of bin Laden, Abdul Majid al-Zindani, and there was never any follow-up report with the Columbus Dispatch.
The United States Treasury Department has labeled Sheikh Zindani as a specially designated global terrorist. Sultan had his application for U.S. citizenship suspended and fled the U.S. in 2007.
So fast forward to 2012, where is he today? Well, he's leading Muslim Brotherhood rallies in Cairo. He's meeting with the top Hamas leaders, and he's a senior advisor to the new Muslim Brotherhood president of Egypt.
With Sultan as a top advisor, President Mohamed Morsi has fast-tracked an Islamist agenda, monopolizing power on behalf of the Muslim Brotherhood.
سيظل القرآن دستورنا. القرآن دستورنا.
Another former leader at the Masjid Omar Mosque on Riverview Drive is now the head of the Noor Islamic Cultural Center, Dr. Hani Safar. He has been listed as the founder, spiritual leader, administrator, and chairman of the Noor Center. He's a former professor at Ohio State University and currently teaches at Columbus State Community College. He was even the featured speaker at a 9/11 memorial service in 2011.
When those people attacked the Twin Tower, they did not only destroy it, they destroyed the image of Islam.
You know, this is the first responders park that they opened the last September 11th anniversary that featured Hani Soccer as one of the speakers. So, of course, the irony being that, you know, you had this imam who was head of the mosque that had the Al-Qaeda cell, and he's leading the, you know, interfaith service at the park, honoring the first responders. I mean, it's just rich with irony.
The Noor Center, under Dr. Soccer's leadership, has hosted soldiers prior to their deployment to the Middle East.
Today, the Muslim headscarf is part of her military uniform.
The headscarf is just respect for the center here, for the women that are here, and, you know, just to be respectful to the people coming into their place, being respectful.
Campbell and about 40 other members of the U.S. Army Reserves sat down with members of the Noor Islamic Cultural Center to learn more about Islam and cultures in Muslim countries.
In central Ohio, Hani Soccer is known as an interfaith moderate. However, during the Holy Land Foundation trial, the largest terrorism finance trial in U.S. history, the Justice Department entered into evidence documents showing Soccer was one of the top leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood movement in North America. Specifically, he was a member of the board of directors and on the executive committee.
We don't want to inquire into their ideology because everybody is afraid of drawing the obvious conclusion that there's a nexus between Islamic scripture and Islamic doctrine and acts of terrorism. And nobody wants to be seen as somebody who is condemning an entire religion, which is what the Muslim Brotherhood frames it as if you draw that common sense connection, which, by the way, is something that the Islamists themselves draw when they're justifying acts of terrorism.
7 generations of my family have lived here in Hilliard. A lot of changes, but I doubt anybody would have ever have expected that, you know, this little cow town would end up being a, you know, hub of Islamic extremism, a hub of anything for that matter.
The thing to remember is this is not something that's isolated to Columbus, Ohio. This is happening everywhere, whether it's Murfreesboro, Tennessee, or Temecula, California, or Chicago, Illinois, or Boston, Massachusetts. This is occurring everywhere we look.
And, as has happened in Columbus, many who question the Muslim Brotherhood narrative are quickly branded as Islamophobic and racist.
And it was only after the neighbors created opposition and brought in, you know, some of their, you know, anti-Muslim hatred into this picture that the city took a step back.
Salam Al-Mariyati is the president of the Los Angeles-based Muslim Public Affairs Council.
We are seeing more evidence of anti-Muslim bigotry and Islam bashing.
To me, it seems like she is the extremist at this point. She's the one going around the United States lobbying against Islamic centers throughout all of the United States. It's not just the ones in Murfreesboro.
One of the things that we forget or we don't do enough of is to understand September the 11th in the context of 20th century history. It's not about the last 10 years, it's not about the last 20 years, it's about the last century. It's about the fact that less than 100 years ago, the caliphate still existed. We think words like the caliphate are funny, are quaint. What, a religious empire of Islam? You're joking, right? I mean, that was prehistory. No, that existed in 1914. Now, we didn't call it the caliphate. It's called the Ottoman Empire. But for Muslims, it was the Caliphate. It was the religious empire of Islam that had existed for centuries.
The Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which used to be the Organization of the Islamic Conference, is the caliphate in the making. It's basically 56 Islamic sovereign governments and the Palestinian Authority.
Their goal of the implementation of Sharia, the goal of Al-Qaeda, the implementation of Sharia, the establishment of the Caliphate, and the Muslim Brotherhood and Tablighi Jamaat and Jamaat-e-Islami and the other parallel movements like the Brotherhood, nobody's ever put those together. That Turkey and Egypt and Pakistan are all parties to an organization whose stated doctrine is the same as Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood and these other groups. That's important, and that's something Americans need to know.
Now, they're basically positioning themselves as the proto-caliphate. And they've said that. They go all the way back to 1988. They play with the language so they can say, we didn't say that. But they kind of run right up to it and walk away. They make all these gestures to make it clear that we are that. But they do call themselves the Ummah. When the OIC meets, it's the Ummah, the Muslim community. And if you think about it, if they really do represent the Muslim world at the head of state level, that is the Ummah. And if they actually do make laws at the head of state level for the entire Muslim world, that would be the replacement of the caliphate. The State Department's relationship, and of course Secretary Clinton as the head of the State Department, the Secretary of State, is that she has ongoing relations. We have a person who sits in at the OIC.
Hello, my name is Rashad Hussain, and I'm the President's Special Envoy to the Organization of the Islamic Conference.
I would think it would be much better if at a senior level of the U.S. government we're meeting with the OIC, we're also meeting with some large group of non-Islamist, non-superiority, non-dominating Muslims, such as those in Indonesia. I think as a general proposition, the U.S. government ought to have relations with countries, not with religions.
In 2005, the OIC held a summit in Saudi Arabia. The group developed a 10-year strategic action plan, which included a directive to combat defamation of Islam.
The term Islamophobia is the politically correct term they created under which it rests the defamation of Islam concept, which they plan to run through the United Nations.
It makes no apologies about that. It's quite straightforward. And the most frightening thing about it for Americans in the short term is that the biggest project the OIC has in the West, and particularly in the United States, is to restrict First Amendment rights. They basically want to make it a crime to discuss Islam in anything that they would perceive as a negative fashion.
In 2011, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton attended a summit in Turkey where she met with the head of the OIC, who was garnering support for United Nations Resolution 1618, the OIC's defamation of religion statute.
Now, that defamation of religion statute is a direct assault on the First Amendment. It's a direct assault on the First Amendment. And what did Secretary Clinton say? She committed in a foreign country to a foreign power, to a foreign entity, the head of the OIC, that she would use old-fashioned techniques of peer pressure and shaming to go after anybody who would try to stand up against that.
And I want to applaud the organization of the Islamic Conference for its leadership in securing the recent resolution by the United Nations Human Rights Council that takes a strong stand against discrimination and violence based upon religion or belief.
I mean, these are the words of the apologists. And that's not what public officials should be telling the American people. The American people need to know what's going on.
And what the State Department is basically agreeing to is to have restrictions on speech that would incite what they would call hostility to Islam. Now, the only incitement you're allowed to prosecute under American law is incitement to violence.
U.S. Ambassador Eileen Chamberlain Donahoe spoke to the UN Human Rights Council in March of 2011, supporting the resolution.
We have long shared the concerns of the co-sponsors and others about intolerance, discrimination, and violence directed against persons on the basis of their religion or belief.
The Brotherhood says to al-Qaeda and the Salafi movement, look, we can do this through legal means, guys. Elections. They're doing it in the Middle East and North Africa, right? They're winning elections throughout the region. The Brotherhood's doing it through completely legal means in most cases. They're winning elections. They're getting jobs in the media, in academia. They're infiltrating.
A key figure in the controversial FBI purge was the president of ISNA, Mohammed Majid. Majid had spoken at the CIA at a counter-terrorism event. He's worked with the National Security Council, and he sits on the Department of Homeland Security Advisory Committee.
It doesn't get any better than showing, as a matter of public record, who it was that was helping our DHS, Civil Rights, Civil Liberties Division, form its combating violent extremism narrative, a narrative to be enforced against the American citizens. Heavy with Muslim Brothers, led by Imam Majid, head of ISNA, unindicted co-conspirator.
And instead of prosecuting them, we have an administration that has thrown their door wide open to them, so that the president of ISNA, Imam Majid, we find out from the White House's own transcript of speeches that, well, he was leading the White House in iftar celebration at the end of Ramadan, doing the prayer for the White House. The president of a named co-conspirator organization supporting terrorism.
By Majid's family ties alone, he should not be allowed in the White House without a stringent security clearance. Yet at the 2011 Ramadan iftar dinner that President Obama had at the White House, who was sitting front and center? Front and center at the head table, right in front of the podium where President Obama was speaking? Well, none other than Mohammed Majid.
But once we as a nation understand that that's how embedded they are in our society, you can liken what they're doing to an insurgency, and therefore what we have to do can be likened to a counterinsurgency, and in a counterinsurgency the focus has to be the local level. It has to be citizens working with their local city town councils to get them educated, working with law enforcement to identify and weed these guys out of the community. It's the only way it's going to happen.
I sit on the Intelligence Committee. We're a very tiny committee. There are 19 of us, and we deal with the nation's classified secrets. And something that has been abundantly clear under the Obama administration is that there has been influence from the Muslim Brotherhood at the highest levels of power. That's a violent organization from across the world. And so we're raising questions.
And if we get enough people to say, yes, something is wrong about our inability to talk truth to power and to be honest about who the threat is, if enough people use that common sense to exert pressure upon the leadership in Washington and elsewhere, and the media, for example, then we will see something change. Because otherwise, the only time it will change, and this is the sad truth, is when that dirty bomb explodes in Boston, when that LPG tanker is detonated as it pulls into LA Harbor. That's when we will suddenly be in a panic and have to reassess everything we do in terms of securing our country. And I don't want it to be the next catastrophic attack that makes us say, okay guys, back to square one, let's be honest about this. I'd like it that the average American says, something ain't right, we're in the 11th year of this war, it would be nice to begin talking about it honestly and attacking the enemy's ideology and using information warfare.
Will you raise your right hand and repeat after me?
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Our oath to the Constitution takes precedence over everything. And we know that we are tasked with keeping the American people safe. That's part of my job on the Intelligence Committee as well as people on the FBI and the people in the military.
The Texas-based Holy Land Foundation was once the nation's largest Muslim charity. Federal authorities accuse the group of giving more than $12 million to support the Palestinian terrorist group Hamas.
Another thing here, Wendy, that was exposed in this trial was really the clandestine network of radical Islamists right here in the U.S. A lot of so-called mainstream American Muslim groups are linked to the radical Muslim Brotherhood movement.
I can't even begin to come up with an analogy. The only thing that comes to mind is Neville Chamberlain arriving back in the UK after the 1938 Munich Agreement was signed with Hitler and proudly waving it over his head.
A simple Google search, if they have Google at the White House, will reveal the concrete Muslim Brotherhood ties of the men and women they are inviting into the halls of power, into the inner sanctum. It's all there. If you want to see it, it's all there.
The history of the FBI, the history of the United States military is to stand up for the truth and to fight for the safety and protection of the American people. That is what the soldier does. That is what the FBI agent does. But what's very troubling right now is that there's a new net of political correctness that seems to be thrown over the agency.
It's not impossible to find real moderate Muslims to work with as distinct from people who are in organizations that the United States government has branded as unindicted co-conspirators in funding terrorism.
It is astounding, not just to me, I think when I just talk to citizens. They don't understand how this is possible. Like, what is it that they're able to see as citizens that seems very easy to understand that a government official, a president, a secretary of a cabinet position cannot see?
Perhaps exposing the real threat to the United States. The most telling examples of how the government has been infiltrated are sealed from public sight. The evidence that would expose the Muslim Brotherhood's jihad in America is kept in 80 bankers' boxes. The files are from the Holy Land Foundation trial. The Obama administration refuses to release them to Congress and to the American people.
It's very odd to me, given that that information doesn't belong to the executive branch. The executive branch actually works for the public. It's our information. And if the right place for it now is so that the people's representatives can get a better understanding of what the threat to the United States is, I don't see any valid reason for holding it back. And certainly, I haven't heard any legally compelling, articulated reason for holding it back.
I brought it up to Director Mueller and to Attorney General Holder, requesting the documents for members of Congress to look at that were provided in discovery to the defendants in the Holy Land Foundation trial. And I've been given, had these brick walls thrown up. Well, we may not be able to disclose that. They gave them to the terrorist supporters. The terrorists all have those discovery documents. Why can't members of Congress? When I hear an Attorney General of the United States come before us and say, somewhat cavalierly, there is a political aspect to this office, it offends me beyond belief. Your job is justice, Mr. Attorney General. It's justice across the board. And that is what's been so troublesome around here. When we made a request a year ago here for the documents that your department has produced to people who were convicted of supporting terrorism. They're terrorists. And we wanted the documents you gave to the terrorists. We're a year later and we still don't have them. Why in the world would your department be more considerate of the terrorists than of the people who are members of Congress who can vote to just completely defund your department? It makes no sense. So I will ask again, and there is no room for a response that, well, it's an ongoing investigation, well, some of these may be classified. I'm asking for the documents your department produced to the terrorist supporters convicted in the Holy Land Foundation trial. Can we get those documents, just the ones that you gave to the terrorist defendants?
Journalists have tried to get those records. Members of Congress have tried to get those records. Members of the Intel Committee have tried to get those records, tried to get those Muslim Brotherhood documents released, but they won't release them. The Obama administration is clinging on to them for dear life. Why? Because if they release those records, my opinion is that the entire house of cards will fall.
The story here is that the only thing that stops people from doing harmful things to the country and that activates them to take the measures that need to be taken to protect the country is political pressure that really comes from the American people. And if it happens, we could see a lot of very favorable policy change. If it doesn't happen, if we all remain asleep and blind, we could have some dark days ahead.
When it comes to where we stand and whether they've won or not, I always say, and now I have the right to kind of say it, having become an American, America is not where I live. America is it's not Washington, it's not New York, it's not LA. America is everything in between. It's that part of the country that is, derisively called the flyover states. I'm always confident about this great nation because there's one thing that defines the people in those states. It's common sense. Sooner or later, Joe Sixpack says, hang on, something's not right here.
The legislators, whether they be local ones, whether they be in Nashville or whether they be in Washington, are we going to notify them that we the people want to know? These things belong to us. Twice, trying to remember them before, twice in our nation's history we enacted laws to stop the communists. That was an excellent tie that he made to the communism. Excellent tie. We're seeing the same thing. We're seeing the same thing right now. And twice we enacted, I believe it was in 1948, 1954, to restrict this anti-American movement. Because Islam is allegedly a religion, then they try to say, well, the First Amendment is the freedom of religion. But no, this is a culture. This is an anti-American culture that has to be addressed as such. But it won't happen unless we, the people, notify our legislators, number one. Number two, elect legislators that understand this. All right? So glad to see Lori Day here tonight, and what a blessing. And let's give her a hand, all right? Coming down to the wire, and we hope she'll do well, and we'll just see what provides there. But we're seeing blasphemy laws. They touched on a little bit there. The anti-Muslim speech laws. Wait a minute. You can't, you're touching the basic rights of freedom for the people here. And we must not allow this to happen. The president of Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood was established in 1928 because in 1924, the caliph was removed. The caliph is the Arabic word for successor. The caliph is to a Muslim what the Pope is to a Catholic. He's their leader. And the caliph was deposed, the fall of the Ottoman Empire after World War I. And in 1928, the organization Muslim Brotherhood was established with a purpose of reinstating the caliph. And they're doing it. They're doing it. You know, it's exciting times where we live, literally. Exciting times where we're seeing the very positive. What if? I've studied prophecy for many years, and we always were told about a revived Roman Empire. The Antichrist would come out of the revived Roman Empire. Why couldn't it come out of the revived Ottoman Empire? There's a good question for you. Now, I say that with a question, but could it be possible? Could the caliph, this leader of the Ottoman Empire, could he be? Because they want to destroy Israel. We're seeing it here in Tennessee, right up in Dover. There's a camp where they're training people allegedly for terrorism. The police just don't want to look at it. They just kind of, if you don't see it, it's not there. I mean, the Murfreesboro Mosque is going in. Now, all across America, the imams, that's the Muslim preacher, the imams, not all of them, but many of them are preaching this violent jihad. Now some of the people that go, there are many moderate Muslims, but there's no such thing as moderate Islam. For you to be a successful Muslim is for you to follow in the steps of their warrior leader, Muhammad. Until we, the people, say that's enough and elect legislators and tell our legislators they've got to stop. Tennessee schools do not need to be Sharia compliant. We're not going to alter our food, our cafeterias for, to have their imams bless all the chickens that are killed. This is going on at Tyson Chicken. There's halal, I believe is the word, but the food has been blessed as it died. No, we're not going to do that. Now, if they want to bring their sack lunch with their halal lunch, they can bring it. But we're not going to change the way we live because of this is America, and we have to go back. We're not upset with Muslims. It's Islam. And we can go from here. If we become energy independent, which is very possible, we get the right leaders in here, we can become energy independent. We have been funneling trillions of dollars into the Arabic community because of the oil that's there over these past 30, 40 years. And it can stop. It can stop. And their economy, the president of Egypt bowed down. His preacher was bowing down. His preacher was saying that was praying for the destruction of the Jews, and allegedly he was in agreement. This happened just the other day. Just the other day. Now this has got to stop. Why are we giving them over $1 billion a year foreign aid? They're not our friends. They've been asking for atomic weapons that they can destroy Israel from their end. They're not our friends. We're not going to give them any help. We dry it up. That's the answer. But I'm glad you could come. And let's see. Any other business, Pat? We're covered. We made it. Go watch the debate and see how it comes out. Make sure you go out and vote.